My spoiled sister broke into my home and destroyed my newborn's nursery. Now my Marine father, an inspector general, is throwing her in federal prison. Hello, my name is Sarah. My sister didn't just cross a line when I was having my baby, she erased it. While I was screaming in labor at the hospital, she was at my home, destroying 9 months and 10 days of love, hope, and careful planning. She damaged everything in my baby's nursery. She didn't account for the man who raised my husband, a 3-star Marine general who takes no prisoners when it comes to protecting his family. Lauren thought she could break me at my weakest moment, but she didn't know my strongest ally was already on her way. The first contraction hit me like a freight train at 4 in the morning, jerking me awake and bolting upright in our bed on Maple Street. William woke quickly beside me, his military training kicking in even in his sleep. Pain spread throughout my midsection, tightening like a vice being mercilessly tightened. I gripped the edge of our wooden headboard, which William had built himself during his last vacation, and tried to breathe through it, just as Dr. Cooper had taught us in countless childbirth classes. November rain pounded our bedroom windows, creating a rhythm that matched my racing heartbeat. Portland's weather had been exceptionally harsh this week, with storm after storm rolling in from the Pacific. Our craftsman's house groaned in the wind, but it felt solid and safe, just like the home William and I had imagined when he served overseas. The kind of place where we could finally start our family. When the contraction finally eased, I glanced at William, who was already reaching for his phone to time the next one. His brown hair stuck out at odd angles, but his eyes were sharp and focused. 3 tours in Afghanistan had taught him to wake up prepared for anything. He squeezed my hand, his calloused fingers resting gently on my palm. 25 minutes later, another wave washed over me, this time stronger. I felt myself making unrecognizable sounds, low and primal, as if my body had completely taken over. William was already dressed and moving with quiet precision around our bedroom, gathering the maternity bag we'd packed weeks earlier. It stood by our dresser like a watchful sentry, filled with tiny onesies, swaddles, and everything else the parenting book told us we'd need for the birth of our daughter, Emily. We'd chosen the name months before, when she was still a fluttering sensation in my womb, and William had video called from base. It felt right then, and it feels even more so today, as another contraction builds and reaches its peak. This tiny girl was our hope during William's difficult reintegration from his previous deployment, during sleepless nights when he would wake up clutching a weapon that wasn't there, and during the gradual process of learning civilian life together. By 6 o'clock in the morning, contractions were coming every 20 minutes. William contacted Dr. Cooper, one hand pressed to the small of my back, where a persistent discomfort had taken up residence like an annoying tenant. Our house seemed different in the early morning, filled with anticipation and energy. Every familiar thing seemed to take on added meaning. The sofa where we'd spent hours discussing baby names. The kitchen table where we laid out paint samples for the nursery. The nursery, soon to be Emily's room, was accessible from the hallway. I spent months perfecting it, painting tiny woodland creatures on the soft green walls, while William assembled the crib and changing table with the same care he used to disassemble his rifle. We bought a rocking chair at a garage sale in Ashland, where my family lived, and I reupholstered it in cream fabric embroidered with tiny foxes. Every aspect was chosen with care, from the mobile William's mother sent from the base's living quarters to the bookshelf already filled with children's stories I couldn't wait to read aloud. When I called my mother at 7 o'clock, her voice was heavy with sleep, but quickly perked up. Helen Carter had been waiting for this call for weeks, checking every day, with growing anxiety about when her first granddaughter would arrive. She promised to come from Ashland as soon as the roads were clear, even though the storm made the mountain passes treacherous. My father, Robert, would stay behind to run his veterinary clinic, but he sent his love and promised to come as soon as the baby was safe. The conversation I dreaded followed. William watched my expression as I scrolled through my contacts to find Lauren's number. My sister and I had, so to speak, a complicated relationship, and pregnancy had only made it worse. Lauren commented on every stage of my pregnancy, how I was rushing to become a mother, how William and I barely knew each other before he deployed, and how difficult life is for military wives. But she was my sister, and despite everything, I wanted her to know her niece was coming. Lauren's phone went straight to voicemail. I left a message between contractions, trying to keep my voice even as I told her we'd be heading to the hospital soon. Half of me was relieved I wouldn't have to talk to her in real time while experiencing the pains of labor, but the other half felt the old sting of disappointment. Lauren was mysteriously absent at a time when I needed family support most. Doctor. Cooper's office called again around 8:30, telling us to go to Riverside Medical Center. The contractions were getting stronger, coming every 10 minutes with such force that I was clutching at anything I could find. William's hand, the car door handle, and the armrest of the wheelchair they used to enter the hospital. The rain had died down to a light drizzle, and the early light was somber and muted as we drove through the deserted streets of Portland. Riverside Medical Center appeared before us like a flash of glass, steel, and modern comfort. William pulled up to the maternity ward, and within minutes I was in a wheelchair, being wheeled through the automatic doors as he parked. The hospital smell immediately assaulted my nose. Hand sanitizer and floor polish mingled with something I couldn't identify. This place, where medical professionals helped bring new life into the world, should have been calming. Instead, it felt overwhelming and unfamiliar. Room 216 became our temporary refuge, a room decorated in soothing blue tones with a huge window overlooking the hospital courtyard. The trees outside were mostly bare, their branches dark against the gray sky, but someone had strung tiny white lights through them, twinkling like stars. Nurse Angela Reed greeted me with a kind smile and skillful hands before taking my measurements and helping me into a hospital gown that left me feeling naked and vulnerable. The next few hours were a whirlwind of mounting pain and medical attention. Dr. Cooper arrived at 9 o'clock in the morning, her usually beautiful hair slightly disheveled from the early call. She expertly checked my progress, telling me I was dilated 4 centimeters and Emily was eagerly awaiting our appointment. William held my hand through every contraction, his presence reliable and reassuring, even when I squeezed his fingers so hard they left marks. Around lunchtime, my mother arrived, bursting into the room with bags of snacks and a tense energy that filled the air. She hugged William passionately, thanked him for taking such good care of me, and then immediately began rearranging the flowers he'd sent and arranging items on my nightstand. Helen Carter demonstrated love through action, doing, fixing, and organizing, and I could see how hard it was for her to accept that all she could do was wait. The contractions were now coming every 10 minutes, stealing my breath and demanding my full attention. I tried to rest between them, but my thoughts kept returning to the nursery at home. I imagined Emily's meticulously crafted crib. The mobile hanging above it cast beautiful shadows on the wall, the nightstand, the diapers, and other small newborn essentials. The rocking chair where I would feed her, sing her lullabies, and watch her grow. During one of these mental digressions, my phone vibrated with a text message. Lauren had finally answered the voicemail I'd left hours earlier. The message was brief and mostly selfish. I can't make it today. I have plans. Good luck, I guess. I stared at the screen, feeling a familiar mix of pain and melancholy. Lauren couldn't even come, or seemed unable to care, for me to meet her niece today. William noticed my frown and glanced at my phone. His jaw tensed slightly, the way it did when he was managing anger. He never said anything overtly negative about Lauren, but I knew he'd noticed a pattern in her behavior over the months we'd been together. The way she undermined my happiness, dealt subtle blows to our relationship, and questioned every decision we'd made about the wedding, the house, and the pregnancy. Another contraction was building and coming, stronger than the others, and I completely forgot about Lauren. This was more than her petty jealousy and attention-seeking. It was about carefully bringing our daughter into the world and about the family William and I were building together. In that moment, nothing else mattered but the life growing inside me and the man holding my hand. Doctor. Cooper returned around 3 o'clock, announcing that I was 8 centimeters dilated and all was going well. The pain was relentless now, moving from one contraction to the next with barely a breath between them. Nurse Angela adjusted my position, helping me find the most comfortable position possible, while my mother stood by with ice cubes and words of encouragement. Just then, William's phone rang. His father's name appeared on the screen, and William stepped out into the hallway to answer it. General Derek Grant didn't call very often, but when he did, it was usually serious. Through the slightly open door, I heard snatches of William's speech. Yes, sir. Today? Anytime. His voice reflected the innate reverence and formality he always felt when speaking to his father. Even though their relationship had improved significantly since our wedding, William returned with a new expression. He didn't exactly look worried, but I noticed a readiness in his military bearing. He squeezed my hand and leaned over to whisper that his father was flying from the base and would arrive by evening if all went according to plan. I was overcome with gratitude, mixed with surprise. General Grant wasn't known for grand gestures or displays of emotion, but the birth of his first granddaughter seemed worthy of a cross-country trip. The afternoon continued in a whirlwind of increasing intensity. Each contraction demanded more of me, demanding greater concentration and regulated breathing. William guided me through each one, his voice firm and encouraging, while my mother provided constant support with ice cubes. Nurse Angela checked on us regularly, monitoring Emily's heartbeat and my progress with professionalism. Around 5 o'clock, another message from Lauren appeared on my phone. This time it was longer and seemed more abrupt than her previous dismissal. Emily, you're not expecting a baby shower or anything. Some of us have real lives and we can't throw everything away for a little drama. I looked at the message, tears welling up in my eyes. Even now, she couldn't help but minimize the situation, making it about herself and her supposed difficulties. I showed my mother the message, which she read with growing bewilderment. Helen had tried to mediate between Lauren and me for years, justifying Lauren's actions and asking me to understand her struggles. But something changed in her gaze when she read Lauren's comments. My mother's face hardened in a way I'd rarely seen, either because of time or because Lauren's cruelty was finally laid bare in black and white. Before she could react, another powerful contraction hit, and I forgot everything but breathing through the pain. Dr. Cooper appeared as if summoned, assessed my progress, and announced with satisfaction that I was fully dilated. Time to give birth. Time to meet our daughter. Time to complete everything we had worked for 9 months. The next hour was the most difficult physical challenge I had ever endured. Each push required all my strength and commitment. William stayed by my side, counting each push and encouraging me when I wanted to give up. My mother squeezed my other hand, tears streaming down her cheeks as she watched her daughter bring new life into this world. Finally, at 1747, Emily Elizabeth Grant was born on a gloomy November evening with a cry that cut through the pain and fatigue like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Dr. Cooper placed her against my chest. This tiny, exquisite creature had dark hair and William's eyes, which seemed to see everything. She was real. She was here. She was ours. The room filled with the tender emotion of new life. William's eyes were full of unshed tears as he stroked Emily's tiny hand with one finger, admiring her delicate miniature nails. My mother wept openly, reaching out trembling fingers to caress Emily's cheek. Nurse Angela fussed around us, tending to our medical needs while we savored our first precious moments as a family. After the initial excitement had subsided and Emily had been washed, measured, and declared perfect in every way, I was finally able to check my phone. People who had been following my pregnancy journey had sent me messages of congratulations and best wishes. However, there was something that made my blood run cold. Lauren had texted again just 30 minutes ago. Finally got the key back from Mom. Thanks for lending it to me. I needed to pick up something I left at your apartment. Don't worry, I was extra careful with everything. The timestamp on the message was 5:15 p.m. Lauren was at our house with the key she'd borrowed weeks earlier and claimed never to have returned when I was in the final stages of labor giving birth to Emily. My hands began to shake as I read the message again, trying to understand why she needed to come to our house today of all days. William saw my expression and leaned over to read the message. His face became very still, just like when he was assessing a potential threat. He quickly contacted our neighbor, Mrs. Robinson, who could see our front yard from her kitchen window. The conversation was short, but he hung up with a sad expression. Mrs. Robinson had noticed Lauren's car in our driveway at 5 p.m. She had also heard sounds like banging or construction coming from the house, but assumed we were having emergency repairs. The noise lasted for 15 minutes and then stopped. Lauren's car left shortly after. A cold dread spread through my chest, conflicting with exhaustion and the overwhelming emotions of recently having a baby. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong. Lauren's claim of extreme caution seemed mocking, as if she were telling me she'd done something deliberately, knowing I couldn't stop her. William was already downloading our home security app onto his phone, which we'd installed before its final deployment to give us peace of mind. His fingers swiped quickly across the screen, accessing video feeds from our home. What we saw made my mother gasp, and William's jaw tighten with barely contained rage. The nursery camera captured the utter devastation. The crib was overturned, its carefully assembled parts scattered across the floor. The changing table was toppled, scattering diapers and supplies everywhere. The rocking chair I'd painstakingly reupholstered lay on its side, the fabric torn. William had spent hours hanging mobiles perfectly, but now it lay broken on the floor. His beautiful woodland creatures were crushed and scattered. Worst of all, though, were the walls. The beautiful mural I'd spent weeks painting of sweet foxes, deer, and rabbits that would welcome Emily home was ruined. Someone had used a hammer or sledgehammer on the drywall, leaving large holes and shards of plaster scattered across the floor. Paint cans had been opened and scattered, leaving red and black streaks across the soft green walls like wounds. Emily stirred in my arms and let out a soft squeak, which made me realize I was holding her too tightly. The room seemed to be spinning, and I couldn't breathe. 9 months of preparation, love, and meticulous planning had been destroyed in 15 minutes by someone who was supposed to love me. While I was bringing a new life into this world, my sister was destroying the environment designed for its development. My mother stared in horror at William's phone screen, one hand pressed to her mouth. She had spent years defending Lauren, justifying her actions, insisting Lauren truly loved me. But there was no justification for this. There was no explanation other than deliberate cruelty. William already held the phone, his fingers moving with military precision across the screen. He was calling someone, his voice strained with suppressed rage. It took me a moment to realize he was calling his father, General Grant, who was scheduled to arrive in Portland within the hour. The conversation was brief and professional, but I could hear William's determination as he recounted what had happened. Whatever his father's response, William's demeanor shifted from anger to something resembling satisfaction. When he hung up, he turned to me with kind eyes and a voice that promised swift retribution. His father was already on his way to our house, accompanied by 2 of his aides from the mission. They would secure the scene and document everything before we returned home. More importantly, General Grant was making his own decisions, using connections and resources Lauren couldn't have foreseen. As I rocked my newborn daughter and looked at the photos of the devastation on William's phone, I felt something shift inside me. Lauren's jealousy and inability to cope with not being the center of attention were no longer the only issues. This was about someone targeting my family, my baby, and my home at a time when we were most vulnerable. Lauren had made a terrible mistake. She assumed I would be too busy giving birth to notice what she was doing until it was too late. She expected to have hours, if not days, before we noticed the devastation, giving her time to make up an excuse or find someone else to blame. She didn't realize that targeting a Marine's family meant declaring war on people who knew exactly how to fight back. And she didn't foresee that General Derek Tank Grant would take a personal interest in the matter. Emily opened her eyes and looked at me with the hesitant gaze of a baby, as if she was still adjusting to this bright new world. Her tiny fingers wrapped around mine with surprising strength, and I felt a wave of protective love rush through me. This was my daughter, and no one was going to harm her or jeopardize the future we were creating for her. Her very existence was founded on the dreams and hopes William and I had invested in this space. Yet, as I looked at my beautiful, healthy baby girl, I realized Lauren had failed completely. She destroyed things, but she couldn't get to what truly mattered. She couldn't destroy the bond between William and me. We couldn't stop loving our daughter. We couldn't stop being family. Nurse Angela returned to check on us, looked at our faces, and immediately asked if we were okay. When William briefly explained what had happened, her attitude changed from professional concern to personal outrage. She informed us that she had been a midwife for 15 years and had never heard of anything so deliberately vile. Dr. Cooper visited us shortly afterward, having learned of the incident from the nursing staff. She offered to keep us in the hospital for an extra day if we needed time to cope at home. She also emphasized that the hospital provides support to families facing domestic challenges. Lauren's actions seemed more sincere and serious, as the medical staff viewed them as a form of domestic violence. Around 7 o'clock that evening, as we discussed logistics and tried to figure out how to deal with the immediate aftermath, William's phone rang again. When General Grant's name appeared on the screen, William automatically responded, "Yes, sir." Under normal circumstances, this would still have made me smile. The conversation lasted longer this time, with William mostly listening and occasionally responding, "Understood," or "Got it." When he hung up, his expression changed. Not exactly satisfaction, but rather a grim anticipation. His father arrived at our home and assessed the extent of the damage. He also conducted a preliminary inquiry into Lauren's whereabouts and learned some interesting details about her recent activities. Apparently, my sister had been busier than any of us expected, and not in a way that would serve her well when the matter reached its inevitable end. The most important news was that General Grant had called the local police and filed a report of trespassing, property damage, and what officers believed to be a hate crime, given the timing and premeditation of the attack. Lauren's use of my mother's key didn't give her legal right to enter the house and destroy things, especially since we were overseas dealing with a medical emergency. As the evening wore on and visiting hours drew to a close, my mother struggled to accept the truth about Lauren's actions. For years, she had defended Lauren, rationalized her behavior, and tried to keep the family together by convincing everyone to ignore Lauren's increasingly disturbing actions. But it couldn't be ignored. Emily slept peacefully in my arms, completely unaware of the drama surrounding her birth. She was perfect and innocent, and looking at her allowed me to focus on what mattered most. Lauren might damage things, but she couldn't affect the love that had birthed this child or the family that would protect her. The future, which had seemed so clear and simple 12 hours ago, suddenly seemed confusing and unclear. We would have to rebuild the nursery, replace everything that had been destroyed, and figure out how to continue living as a family while dealing with the legal and emotional fallout of Lauren's attack. But when I saw William hold his daughter for the first time, his face soft with wonder and hardened with loving protection, I knew we would get through this together. Lauren believed she had chosen the perfect time to break me, to remind me that she could destroy everything I held dear whenever she chose. But she chose the worst possible moment, because now she was dealing not only with her little sister, but with a Marine family that would not tolerate attacks on its own. And General Derek Grant was ready to show her what that meant. That first night in the hospital, Emily's feeding regimen and the constant hum of the medical equipment kept me from sleeping well. Every time I dozed off, my mind returned to those security camera images, replaying the devastation in vivid detail. The overturned crib, the shattered musical toy, the huge holes in the walls I'd painted with such love and anticipation. Every time I woke, reality hit me hard and fast, like stepping on sharp glass with bare feet. William barely slept, spending most of the night pacing between the window and my bed, his phone constantly vibrating with messages from his father. General Grant had spent the evening cooperating with local police, documenting every aspect of the destruction and conducting investigations that seemed to extend far beyond our small suburban home in Beaverton. Even someone on his side found his military precision reassuring and slightly frightening. Around 3 in the morning, as I fed Emily in a dark hospital room, William finally revealed part of what his father had discovered. Lauren's attack on our nursery hadn't been as unexpected as it had first seemed. She'd been preparing for this for weeks, ever since my mother offered to give her a spare key so she could water our plants while we were in the hospital. Video footage from our neighbor's doorbell camera shows Lauren driving past our house several times over the past 2 weeks, apparently timing her surveillance to avoid moments when William would be home on vacation. But the most disturbing discovery was what General Grant found on Lauren's social media pages. She'd been recording her hatred for William and me in private posts that only a few of her closest friends could see. Screenshots collected by police through legal means revealed months of increasingly vitriolic comments about my pregnancy, my marriage, and what they called my ideal fantasy of a little military wife. The posts displayed a level of malice and premeditation that made my stomach churn. One post from 3 weeks ago was particularly disturbing. Some people need to learn that they can't expect to get everything they want. Sometimes reality has to hit them, especially if they're too busy to notice. Another post, made just 5 days before Emily's birth, was considerably more explicit, counting down the days until a reality lesson for the tiny princess. Maybe she'll understand what we all go through. My mother arrived early that morning, looking as if she'd aged years overnight. The woman who had spent decades defending Lauren, justifying her actions and insisting that family should always forgive family, was struggling to reconcile the image of the sister she knew with evidence of deliberate cruelty. She sat in an uncomfortable hospital chair, clutching Emily, tears streaming down her cheeks, apologizing over and over for not understanding who Lauren had become. The conversation with my mother was one of the most difficult of my life. Years of suppressed frustration and ignored incidents came to light as we finally realized the pattern to Lauren's success. Intentionally nasty remarks disguised as jokes. She undermined my confidence before important events, then feigned surprise when things didn't go as planned. A relentless competition I didn't want to participate in, but couldn't escape. My mother expressed her own shame, explaining how she enabled Lauren's behavior by always choosing the path of least resistance. It was easier to encourage me to understand than to confront Lauren about her behavior. It was easier to smooth things over than to set clear boundaries. She convinced herself she was keeping the family together, but suddenly realized she was protecting Lauren from the consequences of her actions, leaving me vulnerable to increasingly aggressive attacks. Dr. Cooper made her rounds at 8 o'clock in the morning, checking on Emily's feedings and my recovery. Noticing the signs of stress on all of our faces, she politely inquired about our situation at home. When William quickly explained what had happened, she immediately offered to extend our hospital stay for another day or two. She had seen families facing domestic difficulties before and emphasized that rushing home to a stressful environment with a newborn was not good for anyone's mental health. The relief I felt at not having to immediately confront a devastated nursery was immense. Emily needed a calm, soothing environment in her first days of life, and I needed time to process what had happened without constantly thinking about Lauren's attack. William enthusiastically accepted Dr. Cooper's offer and went into the hallway to inform my father of our extended stay. General Grant arrived at the hospital at 10 o'clock that morning, and his presence immediately changed the atmosphere in our room. He was everything you'd expect from a 3-star Marine general. Tall, commanding, with steel gray hair and eyes that seemed to absorb everything at once. But when he saw Emily sleeping in my arms, his entire demeanor softened, transforming into something akin to wonder. He brought me flowers and a small pink teddy bear for Emily, which seemed inappropriate for a man who had previously commanded thousands of men. However, his congratulations were sincere and kind. When he held his granddaughter for the first time, his hands were unexpectedly gentle, despite their apparent strength. For a few moments, we were just a normal family enjoying their newest member. When the conversation turned to Lauren, General Grant's demeanor reverted to military mode. He had spent the previous evening working with local police and had new information that changed everything about our situation. The destruction of Lauren's baby was being investigated as a felony due to the scale of the damage and the deliberate nature of the act. Surveillance footage, coupled with her social media posts and the time of the incident, painted a compelling picture of a deliberate criminal act. But there was more. General Grant used his connections to conduct a background check on Lauren, as he did on anyone who might pose a security threat to his family. He noticed a pattern of similar behavior stretching back years. She had been fired from 2 previous jobs for workplace harassment and property damage. A previous roommate obtained a restraining order against her, accusing her of intentionally damaging her graduate school application. Most recently, she was involved in a civil lawsuit with a former business partner, who alleged that Lauren damaged computer equipment and information after a disagreement. The image that emerged painted a picture of someone with a long history of using destruction and sabotage to harm others in violent, unique, or personal ways. It was part of a larger pattern that had been developing for years. The information was simultaneously upsetting and strangely affirming. I wasn't crazy or overly sensitive to feel targeted by Lauren's behavior. She truly was dangerous, and I was living in the crossfire, not fully grasping the gravity of the situation. General Grant stated that the police were prepared to arrest Lauren, but they were working with his security team to ensure the procedure went smoothly. As a military family, we had access to certain benefits and resources that civilian families might not have. The base's legal team had already made plans to assist us with both the criminal case and any civil suit that might arise. Around noon, William's phone rang, and it was Detective Sarah Perez who was handling our case. The conversation was brief, but it had been a particularly difficult weekend. Lauren had been located and brought in for questioning. Her initial reaction was to deny everything, claiming she'd simply stopped by our house to pick up a sweater she'd left there months earlier. However, when presented with surveillance footage and social media, her explanation immediately fell apart. The investigator wanted to meet us at the hospital to take our formal statements and show us the new evidence they'd obtained. She also wanted to discuss security measures, as Lauren's history indicated she would escalate if faced with punishment for her actions. The idea that we might need protection from my own sister seemed absurd, but the detective's fear was genuine and grounded in professional experience. Detective Perez arrived that afternoon with a clipboard full of evidence and approached our testimony politely but thoroughly. She went through Lauren's planned schedule, showing us doorbell camera footage from several neighbors documenting her surveillance of our home. There were photos of her sitting in her car across the street, watching our windows, likely monitoring the lights to establish our daily routine. When the social media data was taken together, it became even more devastating. Lauren had spent months crafting a narrative of resentment against me, portraying herself as a victim of my well-being and my happiness as something stolen from her. The post demonstrated a worldview in which other people's success was interpreted as a personal attack on her, and any achievement by someone else required retaliation to restore balance. Lauren apparently researched labor and delivery times in the weeks leading up to Emily's birth, likely to determine when I would be most vulnerable and least able to respond to an attack. She even researched typical hospital stays for new mothers, likely to determine how much time she would have to commit her destruction before we returned home. Detective Perez noted that this level of premeditation significantly increases the charges. What might have been dismissed as a family dispute or emotional outburst was undoubtedly a planned criminal attack. The evidence showed that someone had invested significant time and effort, intending to inflict maximum psychological damage at the moment when it would be most painful. My mother listened to all this with growing horror, realizing the full extent of Lauren's transformation. Her daughter, whom she had protected and defended for years, wasn't simply troubled or jealous. She was truly dangerous. Lauren's history of escalating behavior indicated that, without action, she would continue to target me, and now my family, in increasingly destructive ways. Around 3 o'clock that afternoon, we received another call that changed everything again. Lauren was arrested and charged with trespassing, property damage, stalking, and what prosecutors described as serious disorderly conduct, given time and forethought. Her bail was set especially high due to a flight risk assessment and a history of similar behavior in her past. However, Lauren reportedly tried to contact me several times from the police station, leaving increasingly panicked voicemails that were now part of the evidence against her. In these messages, she alternated between tearful apologies and aggressive justifications, leaving a clear audio recording of her fragile mental state and her persistent obsession with me. The last voicemail was deeply disturbing. "You think you're great with your perfect husband and child, but I know who you really are. I know what you did to get what you have, and I'll make sure everyone else knows too. This isn't the end, Sarah. This is just the beginning." The threat was clear and unambiguous, ruling out the possibility that her attack on the nursery was an isolated act motivated by temporary emotional distress. General Grant responded to this threat quickly and comprehensively. Within hours, he had established surveillance of our home and the hospital. He also launched a broader investigation into Lauren's actions and connections, viewing her not simply as a family problem, but as a potential security threat to military personnel. The resources at his disposal to protect his family were remarkable and slightly frightening, but also a huge relief, given Lauren's escalating behavior. That evening, as we prepared to spend our second night in the hospital, I had a new perspective on the nursery. Lauren's destruction was meant to break me, to make me feel insecure and violated in my own home. But surrounded by family and protected by resources I never dreamed I'd need, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, coping with Lauren's petty cruelties. Pure, focused anger at someone who had attacked my child and my family. The woman lying in that hospital bed with her newborn daughter wasn't the same one who had spent years trying to reconcile with someone determined to destroy her happiness. Motherhood had awakened something terrible and protective within her, something unsatisfied with simply repairing what had been destroyed. William seemed to see this shift in me as we spoke quietly, Emily sleeping between us. His anger was cool and controlled, reflecting the strategic thinking that made him an exceptional military leader. We were no longer simply victims of Lauren's attack. We were parents with a child to protect. This fundamentally changed our approach. The conversation we had that night wasn't just about Lauren and the destroyed nursery. It was about who we wanted to be as a family, what kind of life we wanted to live, and how far we were willing to go to protect her. For too long, we'd been reactive, allowing Lauren's actions to dictate our responses and limit our options. Now we were going to be proactive. General Grant stopped by late that evening with news that confirmed the correctness of our new approach. Lauren's arrest seemed to trigger a breakdown, leading to additional charges of disorderly conduct and resisting police. More importantly, an investigation into her background revealed that her company was now investigating her for embezzlement, which could explain her recent financial difficulties and likely her growing attacks on my stability. The picture was becoming clearer. Lauren wasn't simply jealous of my happiness. She saw her own life crumbling due to her bad decisions and criminal actions. Her attack on me and my family was both an attempt to bring me down to her level and a desperate attempt to divert attention from her own problems by wreaking havoc on someone else's life. But her calculations turned out to be profoundly flawed. She attacked a man who was no longer alone and vulnerable, but instead had the security and resources of a military family. More importantly, she attacked at a time when others who cared about me would likely have reacted with overwhelming force. As I fell asleep that second night, holding my daughter and listening to my husband's even breathing next to me, I felt something I hadn't felt in years with Lauren. I felt safe. Not because the immediate threat had passed, but because I knew I had the strength and support to cope with whatever might come next. Lauren had tried to destroy my sense of security and happiness at my most vulnerable moment. Instead, she awakened my protective instincts and gathered resources to ensure she would never threaten my family again. Tomorrow would bring new obstacles as we navigated the legal process and began to rebuild what she had destroyed. But tonight, we were united, safe, and prepared for a completely different response than the one Lauren had expected. The woman who had spent years trying to maintain peace with an increasingly dangerous man was gone. In her place was a mother who would do anything to protect her child, and a military wife who understood that some conflicts require total triumph over brief truces. Lauren was about to discover what exactly that meant. The next morning, an unexpected visitor arrived who changed the entire course of our circumstances. Martha Grant, General Grant's wife and Emily's paternal grandmother, arrived at the hospital before dawn with the quiet efficiency that comes with years of experience as a military wife. She entered our room with coffee that tasted truly delicious, homemade muffins that made the hospital food taste like cardboard, and a steely determination that reminded me where William got his fortitude. Martha had flown in from Camp Pendleton immediately after her husband's call, but she hadn't come to offer sympathy or gentle consolation. She had come to act. Within an hour of her arrival, she had transformed our cramped hospital room into a command center, equipped with laptops, legal documents, and a communication system that kept us informed of developments across the state. The news she delivered was both devastating and heartening. Lauren's company had continued its embezzlement investigation, discovering that she had taken approximately $50,000 over the previous 8 months using an elaborate scheme involving fictitious vendor invoices and fake expense reports. The timing was no coincidence. Lauren's financial abuse escalated as my pregnancy progressed, as if my impending happiness had driven her to even more desperate action. However, Martha's most important contribution wasn't information. It was all about perspective. She had spent 30 years as a military wife, dealing with threats to her family, from international deployments to home safety issues. She saw Lauren's incident as a deliberate attack on military personnel that required a comprehensive response, not a family squabble. The contrast in approach was immediately apparent. While my mother sought to understand Lauren's intentions and find ways to heal the family rift, Martha was more concerned with neutralizing the threat and ensuring it never happened again. While I was focused on restoring the nursery and moving forward, Martha considered the long-term consequences that would prevent Lauren from targeting other family members again. Her first step was contacting the base's family support team, a network of military spouses who specialize in assisting families in difficult circumstances. Within hours, volunteers were planning everything from temporary housing to specialized trauma recovery services. The effectiveness was astounding and incredibly calming, like being surrounded by a warm blanket of expert care. However, Martha's most important conversation was with the base's legal team, specifically Major Rachel Williams, who specialized in Homeland Security situations involving military families. Major Williams had extensive experience handling cases in which civilian family members posed a safety threat to active-duty military personnel, and Lauren's case fit several troubling patterns. The legal consultation presented options I hadn't previously considered. Because William was active duty and Lauren's attack targeted his family during a vulnerable period, her conduct could be prosecuted under federal laws, which carried even higher penalties than simple state charges. More importantly, the military could issue protective orders that would be effective nationwide, unlike civilian restraining orders, which were limited to specific counties. Major Williams stated that Lauren's history of behavior, as well as her documented threats and financial crimes, classified her as an ongoing threat to the unit's readiness. This designation indicated that her case would be treated with the same seriousness as threats from foreign agents or domestic terrorists. The resources available to protect military families from such threats were extensive and would be continually available. The conversation also revealed something I hadn't realized about Lauren's timing. Not only had she chosen a time when I was physically vulnerable to attacking Emily at her birth, but she had also chosen a time when William was nominally on paternity leave. Thus, any disruption to his emotional or mental state was a direct attack on his combat readiness. Her actions weren't just criminal. They were potentially treasonable under several federal laws. Around noon, Detective Perez called with an update that changed the situation again. Lauren had been released on bail, despite the excessive amount set. Apparently, she had contacted a bail bondsman who specialized in high-risk offenders and managed to negotiate her release using funds the police were still searching for. This news should have been alarming, but Marta's initial reaction was one of cool satisfaction. Lauren's decision to post bail rather than remain in custody was exactly what Marta had hoped for. Anyone remaining in custody faced only the charges already pending. Anyone free to travel risked surveillance, tracking, and possible future criminal misconduct, negating any chance of a favorable sentence or successful appeal. General Grant arrived within an hour of Lauren's release, accompanied by 2 plainclothes security agents who would monitor both our family and Lauren's movements. The surveillance was not only protective, but also curious. Lauren's every action while on bail would be recorded and could be used as evidence of ongoing threats or violations of her bail conditions. The day brought a phone call that underscored how completely Lauren had underestimated the resources at her disposal. My mother called in desperation, reporting that Lauren had arrived at her home asking for money, a place to stay, and emotional support. When my mother refused and insisted Lauren seek professional help, Lauren allegedly became enraged, prompting my mother to call the police. The incident at my mother's home was captured on her home security system, providing irrefutable evidence that Lauren had threatened both my mother and my family. Furthermore, the video showed Lauren violating her bail conditions by threatening the families of her alleged victims. The bail violation alone was enough to send her back to prison, but the threats added evidence to the federal case quietly building against her. Martha's response to this development was swift and meticulous. She quickly arranged for my mother to be transported to Portland under protective escort, both to ensure her safety and to keep her out of Lauren's hands. My mother's house would be monitored by both local and federal agents, creating a trap for Lauren if she returned. Every action she took while on bail was now being logged and added to the growing body of evidence. But the most important call came late that afternoon from Major Williams of the base's legal services. The federal investigation into Lauren's actions uncovered connections that extended her case beyond domestic violence or property damage. Her embezzlement scheme involved vendors with government contracts, meaning her financial crimes fell under federal jurisdiction. Her attacks on a service member's family during her husband's leave constituted interference with military operations. Most importantly, her documented threats against service members and their families brought her case under federal anti-terrorism laws. Lauren's transition from a nuisance family member to a federal suspect was astounding, but it also brought a level of security and justice I never could have imagined. The resources devoted to her case weren't simply a punishment. They were aimed at ensuring she never threatened military families again. Her case was used as a precedent for how such threats might be handled in the future. That evening, as we prepared for our last night in the hospital, I thought about the nursery again in a different way. Lauren's attack had been intended to undermine my sense of security and happiness, but it had also revealed strengths and resources I hadn't realized I possessed. The destroyed room would be rebuilt, but by a family that recognized its own strength and had access to protection that Lauren couldn't match. William spent the evening talking with his commander, planning his return to active duty and ensuring that Lauren's situation wouldn't jeopardize his military service. The conversation revealed an unexpected level of support. William's unit was informed of the situation and was prepared to provide additional security and resources as needed. His fellow Marines were more than just colleagues. They were brothers who took the threats to their family personally. Emily seemed unfazed by the drama surrounding her birth, lying quietly in my arms while her family mobilized resources from numerous state and federal agencies. Looking at her petite face, I felt a strong sense of pride for the family she was born into and the protection she'd received since birth. Martha spent the evening compiling lists and making calls with the same efficiency with which she'd likely planned the relocation of military families for 3 decades. By morning, we'd have temporary housing while our home was being repaired, expert counseling services to help us cope with the trauma, and a robust safety plan to ensure Lauren would never again threaten our family. Her most important contribution, however, was helping me understand that I was no longer a victim. I was a military wife with access to resources and security that most civilians never had. I was a mother who enjoyed the full support of my military family. Most importantly, I was no longer the lonely young woman Lauren had hounded for years. I was part of a community that cared for its own and did not tolerate threats to their families. The conversation we had that night about remodeling the nursery was unlike any other I'd had about Lauren. We weren't discussing how to manage her behavior or how to live peacefully together. We were discussing completely neutralizing her ability to threaten our family while ensuring full punishment for her actions. The military's approach to problem solving was comprehensive and lasting, not temporary or conditional. Around 10 o'clock that morning, General Grant received a call that filled the room with grim satisfaction. Lauren was arrested again, this time at a hotel near the Oregon-California border, where she allegedly planned to leave the state. Her arrest violated numerous bail conditions and uncovered evidence that would strengthen the government's case against her. The hotel arrest also uncovered new evidence, further strengthening the charges against her. Extensive preparations for future attacks on our family were discovered in Lauren's hotel room, including surveillance images of housing at Base William and a study of security standards in military family facilities. She didn't simply attack our nursery in a fit of rage. She had planned a vast campaign of harassment and intimidation against a military family. The discovery of more planning documents elevated Lauren's case from domestic violence to domestic terrorism under federal law. The conditions she now faced included potential decades of federal imprisonment without the possibility of commutation, as was available in state courts. More importantly, her conviction would result in lifetime restrictions prohibiting her from ever visiting military installations or individuals. As we settled in for our last night in the hospital, I had never experienced anything like this with Lauren before. I felt free, not only protected from imminent danger, but also truly liberated from years of living on the brink of a nervous breakdown alongside someone who constantly sought this level of violence. The sister who had terrorized me for years was now experiencing a punishment commensurate with the scale of her actions. Emily stirred in my arms, making those tiny sounds newborns make in their sleep, and I knew her arrival meant not only the beginning of her life, but also the end of Lauren's power to dictate mine. The nursery would be rebuilt, but by a family with access to protection that no human could match. William reached out to stroke Emily's small hand, his own calm and confident, reminding me why I had fallen in love with the Marine. He had faced far greater challenges overseas than one unstable family member, and he responded to Lauren's attack with the same strategic thought and thorough response that had kept him alive in combat. Martha gathered her papers and computers with satisfaction. Her work for the day was done, but her vigilance remained. She had turned what could have been a horrific attack into an opportunity to permanently eliminate the threat, demonstrating a type of family strength Lauren never knew existed. Tomorrow, we will return home to a home expertly restored and secured by professionals who know exactly what they are protecting. Lauren will face the full weight of federal criminal penalties, setting an example for anyone who dares threaten military families. Emily will grow up in a family that has demonstrated its ability to protect what is most precious. The woman who had spent years trying to control Lauren's increasingly dangerous behavior was gone. In her place was a military wife who realized that some risks require complete elimination, not constant management. Lauren had planned to break me at my most vulnerable moment, but instead, she awakened resources and strength that would protect my family for years to come. As I drifted off to sleep, clutching my daughter, I felt grateful for Lauren's attack, not for the suffering she had caused, but for revealing who my family truly was and what they were capable of when what they protected was threatened. She had intended to destroy my happiness, but she had shown that it was built on foundations she could never touch. When we arrived at the federal courthouse in Portland on Thursday morning, 3 weeks after Emily's birth, it felt like we'd entered another universe. Lauren's case extended far beyond the confines of family court or state criminal justice, as evidenced by the building's high granite facades and heavy security presence. Serious federal crimes were being tried here. Defendants faced decades of federal imprisonment, and the full weight of government resources was being deployed to combat threats to national security. Major Williams arranged for us to enter through a separate entrance to avoid the media frenzy surrounding Lauren's case. Apparently, the story of a woman who targeted a service member's family during childbirth sparked national interest, particularly among military communities and domestic violence advocacy groups. The case was used as an example of how threats against military families would be prosecuted to the fullest extent of federal law. Emily slept soundly in her carrier, completely unaware that she would witness the gradual destruction of the man who had planned to torment her from the moment she was born. She thrived at 3 weeks old, despite the drama surrounding her arrival. Her pediatrician pronounced her perfectly healthy and developing normally, a monument to the safe environment we managed to create, despite Lauren's best efforts. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, yet it was charged with such tension that the air seemed charged. Federal prosecutors sat at a table, holding documents that seemed to span Lauren's entire life story, while her court-appointed attorney seemed overwhelmed by the weight of evidence against his client. General Grant sat in the courtroom with the air of a man accustomed to seeing justice done, while Martha held Emily with the gentle confidence of someone who had raised children through countless military crises. Lauren was brought in wearing an orange jumpsuit and handcuffs, and I barely recognized the sister who used to dominate family dinners with her presence and thoughts. 3 weeks in federal prison stripped away the polished facade she'd always maintained, revealing someone smaller, more desperate, and suddenly aware that her actions had consequences she couldn't control or avoid. Assistant U.S. Attorney Monica Chang presented Lauren's case with clinical precision, leaving little room for pity or mitigation. Since Lauren's arrest, charges have expanded to include wire fraud, money laundering, cyberstalking, interstate transportation in furtherance of racketeering, and domestic terrorism under federal laws designed to protect government employees and their families. Lauren faced 7 separate wire fraud charges, each carrying a potential 20-year sentence. The money laundering charges carried an additional 20 years, while the domestic terrorism charges could have carried a life sentence under federal law. The cumulative effect was staggering, precluding the possibility of a plea bargain in state court. However, the presentation of evidence revealed how completely Lauren had miscalculated the resources deployed against her. Federal agents reconstructed not only her recent crimes, but also a nearly decade-long pattern of escalating criminal behavior. Bank records, social media posts, work records, and surveillance footage from multiple states all painted a picture of a person who had spent her entire adult life manipulating, stealing, and systematically destroying the wealth of others. The financial crimes were particularly devastating, as they demonstrated premeditation and sophistication, contradicting any claims of emotional instability or temporary poor judgment. Lauren used stolen identities to open fictitious vendor accounts, manipulated computer systems to authorize fraudulent payments, and laundered the stolen funds through a network of accounts across multiple states. The plot took months to organize and execute, indicating criminal capabilities that extended far beyond family discord. The cyberstalking information was particularly disturbing, as it revealed the extent to which Lauren was monitoring not only me, but also William's military career and members of our extended family. She hacked our social media accounts, intercepted emails, and used sophisticated software to monitor our movements and activities. The level of surveillance was comparable to what federal investigators often encounter in situations involving foreign intelligence agencies or domestic terrorist organizations. Most damaging of all, evidence was discovered in Lauren's hotel upon her arrest. Federal authorities presented detailed preparations for what prosecutors described as long-term psychological warfare targeting service members and their families. The plans included surveillance schedules at numerous military installations, research into the personal information of other military wives in our city, and purchase lists of weapons and surveillance equipment. A so-called trophy collection from Lauren's previous attacks on family members and colleagues, as described by federal investigators, was also found in the hotel room. She kept photographs of damaged property, audio recordings of emotional conversations, and detailed notes on the psychological impact of her actions on her victims. The collection revealed that Lauren's attack on our nursery wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a long-term pattern of predatory behavior. When the prosecutor showed photographs of our destroyed nursery on the courtroom screens, the impact was immediate and emotional. Carefully painted forest-themed murals had been reduced to holes in the drywall, an overturned crib with parts scattered across the floor, a torn rocking chair that had been painstakingly and hopefully reupholstered. The timing of the destruction, while I was giving birth to Emily, added a cruelty that caused several people in the courtroom to gasp aloud. But the prosecution didn't stop with the emotional damage. They methodically established how Lauren's attack met federal domestic terrorism standards, attempting to intimidate and coerce military personnel through violence and destruction of property. The attack was planned to inflict maximum psychological harm at a time when Williams's emotional stability was critical to his military fitness and performance. Federal terrorism laws were specifically enacted to protect government employees and their families from this type of deliberate targeting. Lauren's documented threats against military installations and troops elevated her case from domestic violence to a threat to national security. The sentences available under these provisions reflected how seriously the federal government took such attacks. Lauren's court-appointed attorney worked diligently to present his client as a man suffering from mental illness, who acted out of envy and emotional pain, not malice. He advocated for a psychiatric diagnosis and therapy instead of the draconian penalties sought by federal prosecutors. His presentation was polished and detailed, but ultimately overshadowed by the overwhelming evidence proving premeditation and insidious criminal planning. The psychiatric evaluation conducted during Lauren's federal custody actually worked against her defense, not in her favor. Federal psychologists found no evidence of mental illness that could explain or mitigate her unlawful behavior. Instead, they found personality traits that made her more dangerous, not less responsible. The evaluation concluded that Lauren was fully aware of the criminality of her actions and chose to escalate her attacks despite knowing the consequences. Lauren was finally given the opportunity to speak on her own behalf, and her testimony demonstrated the same lack of genuine remorse that had characterized her behavior throughout our lives. She claimed that her desperate actions were motivated by familial bias and jealousy over unfair advantages. She claimed her attack on the nursery was intended as a wake-up call rather than a serious criminal offense, and she seemed shocked that federal investigators classified her actions as terrorism rather than family dysfunction. Most tellingly, Lauren's message contained repeated threats against our family, disguised as predictions about future family dynamics. She stated that Emily would eventually learn the truth about her parents and that military families are always responsible for their decisions. The threats were subtle enough to avoid immediate contempt of court charges, yet clear enough to demonstrate that she continued to view our family as a target for future punishment. Judge Caroline Morrison had presided over federal terrorism trials for over a decade, and her response to Lauren's plea was swift and thorough. She stated that Lauren's continued focus on our family as targets made her an ongoing threat to public safety, requiring ongoing neutralization. Judge Morrison imposed a harsh sentence. Lauren will serve 18 years in federal prison for the combined offenses, without the possibility of parole under federal sentencing standards. Upon release, she faced 15 years of supervised release with restrictions that would prohibit her from traveling freely, accessing computers without supervision, or contacting any of our extended family. Most importantly, her conviction under federal terrorism laws would result in her being placed on a lifelong watch list that would track her activities for the rest of her life. Any subsequent interaction with military personnel or targets would trigger an immediate federal investigation and possible additional charges. She would never again be able to fit into civilian life and prey on vulnerable families without attracting federal attention. The forfeiture order was equally sweeping, stripping Lauren of all assets derived from her illegal activities or used to support her crimes. Her lease was canceled, her car was impounded, and her bank accounts were frozen until federal authorities completed their investigation into her financial activities. She would leave federal prison wearing only clothing provided by the Bureau of Prisons. But perhaps most importantly, Judge Morrison issued a permanent federal restraining order that would remain in effect for the rest of Lauren's life. Any attempt to contact our family, visit military installations, or engage in conduct deemed threatening by federal authorities would result in immediate arrest and additional terrorism charges. The warrant was enforceable nationwide and administered by federal agencies whose resources Lauren could never have evaded or overcome. Lauren's reaction when the sentence was announced was swift and revealing. Instead of expressing regret or admitting responsibility, she screamed, threats and accusations that court staff had to suppress. Her final words as she was led out of the courthouse were directed at me, promising that federal prison would not protect our family forever and that she would find ways to make us pay for ruining her life. The threats were documented by court reporters and immediately added to Lauren's federal file as evidence of her ongoing threat to our family. They were also used to facilitate federal monitoring of her prison communications and visits, ensuring that any attempt to orchestrate retaliation from federal custody would be thwarted and prosecuted as a separate crime. Walking out of the federal courthouse that day, carrying Emily in a carrier and surrounded by the safety and love of my military family, I felt something I'd never felt for Lauren before. I felt complete liberation, not just safety from immediate danger, but true freedom from decades of fear and exploitation. The sister who had tormented me since childhood was finally experiencing consequences commensurate with the gravity of her misdeeds. General Grant's delight was palpable but restrained, the reaction of an officer who had successfully eliminated a threat to his family. Martha's relief was palpable, the sigh of someone who had spent weeks marshaling resources to protect her granddaughter and daughter-in-law from further harm. William's hand on my shoulder radiated the steadfast strength of a man who had dealt with threats abroad and was not about to allow domestic threats to succeed where foreign adversaries had failed. Media interest outside the courthouse was enormous but fleeting. Federal prosecutors used the case to send a clear message about how threats against military families would be handled. Military family support groups hailed Lauren's sentence as an example of justice served. And the story spread throughout the military community as a warning to anyone who might consider targeting service members or their families. But for us, the courthouse steps marked the end of Lauren's ability to cloud our happiness and the beginning of a life in which we could focus on building our family without looking over our shoulders. Emily cooed blissfully in her carrier, surrounded by her grandparents, who had mobilized federal resources for her defense, and her parents, who had discovered their true strength when it came to protecting what mattered most. The drive home passed the Federal Correctional Facility, where Lauren will spend the next few months before being transferred to serve her permanent federal prison sentence. The high walls and barbed wire of this building served as a tangible reminder that some actions had consequences that couldn't be mitigated, managed, or circumvented by family connections and manipulation. That evening, as we settled into our temporary housing while our home underwent final security upgrades and renovations, I received a call from Detective Perez with another piece of information. Lauren's federal prison assignment had been finalized, and she would serve her sentence in a maximum security facility in another state without access to local support or family visits. Her placement had been carefully chosen to ensure she would have no opportunity to coordinate any retaliatory strike or ongoing harassment of our family. The investigator also informed us that Lauren's case was being used as a training tool for law enforcement agencies across the country, illustrating how to recognize and prosecute the growing threats against military families. Our experience was connected to protecting other families from similar attacks, giving meaning to the agony we'd endured, and ensuring that Lauren's actions would continue to serve justice long after her conviction. As I fed Emily that last evening in temporary housing, hoping to return to our renovated home the next day, I realized Lauren had failed in the most fundamental way. She had plotted to destroy my sense of safety and happiness at a time when I was most vulnerable. Instead, it awakened resources and unleashed strengths that would keep my family safe for years to come. The nursery that awaited us at home was lovingly restored by volunteers from military families, outfitted with security features to protect Emily, and blessed by a community that rallied around us during our difficult time. It would be a beautiful room where our daughter could grow up safe and loved, surrounded by people who took the threats against military families very seriously. 6 months later, I stood in Emily's fully restored room, watching my daughter reach for the mobile that slowly swung above her crib. The forest creatures dancing in the afternoon sunlight were even more beautiful than the originals Lauren had destroyed, painted by military wives who had donated their time and talent to create something truly unique. Every brushstroke represented the love and support of the community that rallied around us in our darkest times. The room wasn't just restored, it was transformed. Enhanced security features were seamlessly integrated into the exquisite design. From reinforced windows that let in the soft Oregon winter light to a monitoring system that was instantly linked to base security, Emily would grow up in a room that served as both a sanctuary and a fortress, with resources Lauren never dreamed of. William entered with Emily's daytime bottle, his movements confident and calm, demonstrating how much our lives had stabilized since Lauren's imprisonment. The hypervigilance that marked his first weeks as a father had given way to the natural alertness of a caring parent, not the tactical knowledge of someone anticipating an attack. He had returned to the full alertness of 3 months earlier, confident that his family was equipped with mechanisms that would function without restraint. Emily had grown into a remarkably calm and happy child, as if she knew she was surrounded by people willing to do anything to keep her safe. Her pediatrician frequently noted her accelerated growth and cheerful disposition, noting that children raised in a safe, nurturing environment typically develop this way. The stress of her birth environment had no lasting impact on her growth or personality. The prosecutor's office kept us informed of Lauren's transition to federal prison, but the updates were brief and clinical. She had been placed in administrative segregation for her own safety after threatening other inmates associated with military families. Her prison communications were monitored under federal anti-terrorism regulations, and several attempts to send letters to our family were intercepted and added to her file as evidence of ongoing violations of the restraining order. The legal case ended last month with a settlement that will cover Emily's college education and provide support to other military families facing similar threats. Lauren's insurance company initially tried to deny the settlement, arguing that her actions constituted terrorism rather than covered incidents. But federal prosecutors pursued the case with the same tenacity they had during the criminal trials. More importantly, Lauren's case has influenced reforms in federal law enforcement processes for assessing threats to military families. The FBI established specialized units to track and prosecute domestic terrorism cases involving government employees, using Lauren's behavioral patterns to identify such threats before they escalated into violence. My relationship with my mother became deeper and more honest than ever before. Recognizing Lauren's true character led her to confront decades of enabling behavior and distorted family loyalties. She underwent counseling to address her guilt and became an advocate for other family members living with abusive relatives. Her transformation from enabler to caregiver was as profound as anyone's. My father surprised everyone by providing unwavering support throughout the trial. His veterinary practice gave him experience working with aggressive animals, and he used this knowledge to better understand Lauren's behavior patterns, helping federal investigators build their case. His quiet strength was exactly what our family needed during months of uncertainty and legal complexity. Martha moved to California after Lauren's incarceration, but she left behind a network of support and protection that lasted for years. Military spouse communities embraced Emily and me as examples of resilience and the value of protecting family, fostering bonds that went far beyond simple friendship to a true sisterhood. The renovation made the mansion more magnificent and secure than ever before. Military contractors reinforced the doors and windows, upgraded the security system, and improved the overall structure while preserving the original charm and character. Lauren's strike left us a home that was much sturdier than before. Emily stirred in her crib, making soft sounds that signaled she was ready for her afternoon meal. I picked her up, amazed at how much she had grown and how well she had fit into our lives. Her presence served as a catalyst for everything that followed, uniting so many people to protect our family and ensure that threats like Lauren's never happened again. Settling into a rocking chair restored with even greater comfort and elegance than the original, I reflected on the woman I was before Emily was born and Lauren's attack. That person was reactive, constantly trying to manage Lauren's behavior and reduce conflict rather than address the root cause. She was isolated, relying on a family dynamic that valued peace over protection. The woman sitting in this chair was completely different. She recognized her own worth and the strength of the community that supported her. She learned to identify dangers early and respond with overwhelming force rather than wait for gradual improvement. Most importantly, she understood that true family safety sometimes requires permanent separation from dangerous family members, not continued toleration of their escalating behavior. Emily, with a satisfying efficiency, immersed herself in the feeding that permeated her every action. Her small hand held my finger with surprising strength. Looking at her flawless face, I felt profound gratitude for Lauren's attack, not for the suffering she caused, but for the strength she displayed and the protection she evoked. Our daughter had proven her ability to protect what mattered most. Daylight streaming through the reinforced windows created iridescent patterns on the painted forest scenes, creating an almost mystical atmosphere in the room that had previously been completely damaged. The beauty was now deeper, created with purpose and care by people who understood its importance. Every detail was carefully chosen not only for its aesthetic value, but also for the message it conveyed of resilience and rebirth. William walked through the doorway, carrying his laptop and settling into a reading chair to work while remaining close to his family. His presence was both calming and protective, the steady reliability of a man who had faced genuine threats abroad and knew the difference between real danger and staged one. Lauren's attack had been serious enough, but the response had been so meticulous that any further threats seemed virtually impossible. The monthly security briefings we received from base staff had become routine rather than urgent, updates on a well-managed situation rather than warnings of potential threats. Lauren's prison communications were still monitored, but intercepted conversations revealed she was more concerned with surviving federal custody than orchestrating future retribution. The scale of her defeat seemed to finally pierce her illusions of control. Emily finished feeding and looked at me with that attentive expression that had become increasingly frequent as she grew and developed. Her eyes reflected the same steadfast intelligence I admired in her father. Yet, there was something distinct about the way she perceived her surroundings. She would grow up knowing she was safe and respected, surrounded by people who had demonstrated their concern for her well-being. A knock on our front door that day brought news that perfectly capped Lauren's narrative. Detective Perez came to inform us that Lauren's embezzlement case had led to new federal charges that would increase her prison sentence by 8 years. More importantly, her former employer had agreed to testify in other cases involving similar financial crimes. The detective also informed Lauren that her former roommate and business partner had filed a civil lawsuit seeking compensation for the sabotage and destruction they had suffered. The federal conviction made civil claims much easier to prove, and the settlements ensured Lauren's victims received compensation, while she remained financially devastated for the rest of her life. Most importantly, Lauren's case was used in federal law enforcement training programs to demonstrate how to identify and prosecute growing threats against government employees. Her story will serve justice for years to come, protecting other families from similar attacks and ensuring that her crimes have a lasting impact beyond our personal experience. That evening, as we prepared Emily for the evening ritual in the nursery, which had become a symbol of resilience and rebirth, William and I discussed our future plans. His next promotion was expected within a year, possibly accompanied by a move to a new base where we could continue building our life together. The prospect of moving no longer seemed daunting because we knew our safety net and support network would accompany us wherever military service took us. Emily's evening ritual had become a cherished tradition. From her bath in the bathroom adjacent to the nursery to the books we read in the comfortable rocking chair next to her crib, she was beginning to show preferences for certain books and songs, forming an identity that would distinguish her while carrying the strength and security of her military family background. As I tucked Emily into her crib and watched her fall asleep with the contentment of a child who had never experienced true insecurity, I reflected on how Lauren's attack had radically changed our lives. The woman who had tried to destroy our happiness at our most vulnerable moment had instead revealed the resources and strength that had protected our family for years. The mobile above Emily's crib rotated slowly in the gentle airflow generated by the heating system, casting dancing shadows of forest creatures on the lovingly and meticulously restored walls. Each shadow symbolized not only artistic beauty, but also the supportive community that surrounded us in our time of need, and continued to do so for years to come. William's hand on my shoulder as we stood watching our daughter sleep held all the warmth and strength I had come to love all those years ago. But it also carried a new depth of security and devotion, forged in the fire of trial. We had survived the worst family disharmony and emerged stronger, more united, and better protected than ever before. The house fell silent around us in the evening, the soothing hum of the security system a reassuring reminder that we were protected by technology and human connections Lauren could never have foreseen or overcome. Emily slept soundly in her renovated nursery, surrounded by beauty meticulously and lovingly restored by people who knew what they were preserving. Returning to our bedroom that night, I paused for a moment to look out the window at the suburban street where we had created our life together. The ordinary suburban neighborhood had a special meaning because we had fought to protect it and had the support to keep it safe. Our home was no longer just a home. It was a fortress built on military-style family solidarity and community support. The woman who once tiptoed around a dangerous family member was gone forever, replaced by someone who recognized her own strength and the strength of her protective group. Lauren wanted to teach me that I was vulnerable and alone, but she taught me that I was loved and protected by people who would do anything to keep my family safe. Emily would grow up knowing this story, understanding that her birth was marked not by devastation, but by a mobilization of love and protection that would surround her for the rest of her days. The destroyed and rebuilt nursery would always remind her that beautiful things can emerge from terrible circumstances when they are restored by people who truly care. Years later, when Emily was old enough to understand the full story of her birth and the subsequent attack, she would learn that evil acts can unleash unexpected strength, and that true family is defined not by biological bonds, but by people who choose to protect and support each other. The military community knew who our true family was and what they were capable of when something they protected was threatened. The military community that welcomed us during our crisis remained part of Emily's extended family as she grew up, providing her with models of resilience, service, and dedication to protecting others. She recognized early on that some people dedicate their lives to protecting what matters most, and how fortunate she was to be part of that group. The renovated nursery will always be more than just a place for our daughter to sleep and play. It will represent resilience, renewal, and the power of community support to overcome individual hatred. Every exquisite detail will tell us that love and protection can restore all that hatred tried to destroy. Her isolation and selfishness blinded her to the fact that military families are never truly alone, without resources or without people willing to fight for them. Her loss was complete and irreversible, serving as a warning to anyone else who might consider similar actions. As I fell asleep that night, holding my husband's hand and listening to our daughter's calm breathing in the next room, I felt the deep satisfaction of someone who has endured a trial and triumphed. Not because we defeated Lauren, but because we realized how strong we are and how well protected our family will always be. And as this story fades into the shadows of your mind, disappearing into the silent realms where memory and mystery intersect, remember that it was never just a story. It was an awakening, the raw pulse of human reality, locked in whispered secrets and hidden emotions. Every word is a shard, a fragmented reality. Every sentence is a connection between the visible and invisible worlds, between the brightness of revelation and the darkness of what remains unsaid. Stories work their most powerful magic in this borderland, awakening the deepest corners of your soul, igniting hidden fears, buried desires, and fragile hopes that cling to your heart like fragile embers. That is the power of these stories. These digital confessions scream into a vacuum where anonymity serves as a mask for truth, and each viewer becomes the keeper of secrets too heavy to bear alone. And now this secret, this trembling echo of someone else's reality, has become part of your own shadowed narrative, intertwining with your thoughts, awakening that undeniable curiosity, an insatiable hunger to discover what lies beyond. What stories remain to be told? And what secrets hover just beyond reach, waiting for you to discover them? So hold on to this feeling, this electrifying thread of wonder and anxiety, for it is it that connects us all through the great invisible web of human existence. If your heart pounds and your imagination wanders to what ifs and maybes, you know the story has done its work. Its charm has woven itself into the very fabric of your being. So before you leave this realm, know this: every story heard here is a whispered invitation to explore deeper, to listen more, and to embrace both the darkness and the light. And if you feel lost or even slightly changed, honor this connection by keeping the flame alive. If the narrative left you confused, please like this video, subscribe to join the Brotherhood of Seekers seeking unseen truths, and hit the bell to be the first to welcome the next confession, shadow, or revelation that is ready to emerge from the depths. For here we don't just tell stories, we evoke them. We become a vessel for the forgotten, the hidden, and the unheard.